dedicated today to Chris Hannan's play What Shadows. The seminar has been organized by Nathalie River-de-Car, who unfortunately cannot be with us this afternoon, so I'll try my best to host the seminar. She organized this session on the occasion of the publication in French of Chris' play, the play that Vincent is showing us was published by the Presses Universitaires du Midi at the end of 2021. I found a very interesting quote by our colleague Trevor Harris to describe the play as a plea in favor of an all-inclusive national conversation to help overturn deeply ingrained prejudices in all parts of British society. And certainly 50 years after the famous Rivers of Blood speech, there continued to be the need for an ongoing conversation on immigration and integration in the UK. And if I can say, even in France, we should have that kind of conversation. So today we have several contributors, and I'm very pleased to introduce them. First, Romain, Garbaye and Vincent Latour. They wrote an introduction to the French version of the play, and they will provide us with some historical, political, and social elements to contextualize the play. Their contribution is entitled From Rivers of Blood to Brexit, the Temptation of Identity Fallback in the UK. Both are professors of British Studies and co-founders of the GIS MiDiB. Romain teaches at Sorbonne Nouvelle University, and his research interests include multiculturalism and the politics of ethnic diversity, but also group identities and popular cultures in the UK and in comparative perspective. Vincent focuses on Franco-British and wider European studies with a particular emphasis on multiculturalism, immigration, and minority communities. Then we will have a contribution by Jeanne Schaaf, who translated the play in French with Elisabeth Angel Perez. Jeanne's contribution is entitled What Shadows, Ce que les ombres, Translation, History and Diversity. Jeanne teaches at Sorbonne University, and she defended a PhD thesis entitled The Places and Non-Places of the Scottish Stage, Identity Constellations in a Post-National Era, under the supervision of Elisabeth Angel Perez. And fields of research include contemporary British and Scottish theatre, but also the link between theatre and nation, the tension between local and global stages, as well as the emergence of new artistic communities in a technological era. And then obviously we will have the pleasure to hear Chris Hannan, the author himself. Chris is a playwright and a novelist. His plays have been produced by the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Old Vic, the National Theatre of Scotland, Shakespeare's Globe, and the Traverse. And these include Elizabeth Gordon Queen, Shining Souls, The God of Soho. And if I'm right, What Shadows was first played at Birmingham Rep in 2016. And today he will be interviewed by Pascal Cudicio, who's a legal English teacher at Paris Panthéon-Assas University. So Pascal's main academic interests lie in British studies, political drama, and English for specific purposes. Is member of the CRECIB, and as a member of Jaurès, he supervises its legal English work group. and is currently working on an international conference for Assas students during next March, with the support of Chris Hannan, entitled 3 Nations and 1 Contested Province. It's a conference dealing with the state of the UK against the backdrop of devolution at 20 and Brexit. I suggest that we have questions at the end of all the presentations. I think that will be easier, so that we have a real debate between the contributors and the floor. So without further details, I'm going to give the floor to Romain and Vincent.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you very much for your introduction. This is great. Might I just add that we're particularly grateful. We're sorry that Nathalie Rivière-de-Cal, we're very sorry that she couldn't be here to do it, to host this session herself, because she organized it and she published Chris's play in French, the Presses Universitaires de Toulouse. But we're very grateful to you, Catherine. Thank you for hosting this, because you've already hosted a session last week on asylum seekers in the UK. And so you're doing a lot of great contributions to our seminar that we co-organized with Vincent. So without further ado, we're going to start by making, as you said, a few brief introductory remarks about the historical and political context in order to try to clarify the context of the play, to try and introduce it to clarify this, what is at stake in the play, because it's probably much clearer for a British audience than a French one, even an informed French audience about Britain. So Vincent, I think we've planned that you would start with a few remarks, yes, and then yes, I would complement what you will say.
That's fine, yeah. And I will ask Catherine, if you don't mind, as co-animator of the session on Zoom, if you can actually make sure that people in the waiting room are, because are allowed into the meeting. Okay, so thanks a lot. And it's a real pleasure and honor to have Chris with us today. And so this presentation, as Romain said, is meant to contextualize the speech and to analyze its long-lasting impact on British society and politics, and to draw parallels with the contemporary period. It is based on the introduction Romain and I wrote to the French version of the play, which we encourage you to read for a more detailed analysis. So we're not just encouraging you to read our introduction, but we encourage you to read the play in general.
Yeah, most importantly, the play, actually. It's much more fun than our intro.
It's actually much better than our introduction. We did what
that's the whole point. Yeah,
and the introduction is great. It's bilingual, actually. I say French version, but this is actually a bilingual version, which is something great. So anyway, so Chris Hannan's What Shadows masterfully describes the personal, intimate, and beyond the national consequences of Enoch Powell's 1968 Rivers of Blood speech, whose consequences have been felt since 1968. So in the post-war period, the British Nationality Act in 1948, passed under Clement Attlee's Labour government, granted British nationality to old and new Commonwealth citizens alike. They were legally entitled to enter and settle in Britain in order, on the one hand, to respond to the country's reconstruction needs, and on the other hand, to help Britain preserve its geostrategic interest as decolonisation was accelerating. So nationalised companies or public sector consortia, such as London Transport, British Rail, or later the NHS, opened recruitment offices in the Caribbean from the mid-1950s onward. And they did that for a couple of decades, probably until the early 70s. So therefore, colonial or post-colonial immigration was encouraged and organized by the state, including transport. If we think about the Windrush, well, the Windrush actually was a Royal Navy troop ship. Right. So in his 1968 speech, Powell lambasted what he perceived as Britain's open door policy, although the first severe restrictions to post-colonial immigration had been introduced as early as 1962, so 6 years prior to his speech. So indeed, at the end of mass unskilled immigration from the new Commonwealth came as early as 1962 with the Commonwealth Immigrants Act, partly for political reasons, as immigration from the new Commonwealth had become very politicized since the mid-1950s. But economic immigration, unskilled immigration, was replaced by the large-scale development of family reunion, which you can also call family reunification, which continued well into the 1970s, with many newcomers taking up jobs, actually with the tacit approval of successive governments, whenever it suited the needs of the British economy. But in numerical terms, family reunion actually transformed the country far more than unskilled economic immigration between 1948 and 1962, which explains why that type of immigration was targeted by Powell in his speech. So as will be developed in detail by Romain later on, obviously many parallels may be drawn between the targeting of new Commonwealth immigrants by Powell and the long ongoing illiberal sequence, which started with the election of the coalition government in 2010. I will say no more now, but I will leave it to Romain to develop. There are many interesting and obvious parallels between the late 1960s and the period which we entered in 2010. There is also an obvious link between xenophobia and anti-Europeanism. This was visible during the Brexit campaign, and it has been confirmed since then, but it was also true of Powell himself, who was a staunch and eloquent opponent to Britain's EEC membership throughout the 1960s and 70s. So Powell's speech is staged by Chris Hannan in the play, Act 1, Scene 10, if I'm not mistaken. And Powell was obviously the first high-profile politician to frontally attack post-colonial immigration. He pleaded for re-immigration, and in another speech delivered 7 months later before the London Rotary Club, Powell went so far as to recommend the creation of a ministry for repatriation. And incidentally, a candidate in the French presidential election did exactly the same earlier this week, Éric Zemmour, right? When he said he would create a ministry for re-immigration, un ministère de la remigration in French. And this illustrates, obviously, the relevance and the timeliness of the French translation of What Shadows. And I'm sure if the play was staged in France, it would be extremely relevant and timely too. So though ousted from the shadow cabinet by Edward Heath, and Heath is actually lambasted on several occasions by Powell in the play, in Act 1, I think Scene 2 and Scene 5, Powell continued to play a role in national politics after 1968, notably in 1975 during the EEC referendum. He made a strong case against continued British membership of the EEC through defending parliamentary sovereignty and through supporting free trade. And as underlined by David Shields from the London School of Economics, Powell proved to be a powerful influence on Tory Euroscepticism. So Chris Hannan, and these will be my last words in my part of that talk, Chris Hannan skillfully describes Powell's inner circle. He also describes his ambitious and complex personality, marked by nostalgia for Britain's imperial past and for his own military past during the Second World War, as well as his desire to do something big, which he hoped would give him considerable political gains. So over to you, Romain.
Oh, well, great. Thanks very much, Vincent. I think you covered a lot of ground already in giving us a lot of historical background and contemporary parallels that explain why Chris Chris's play is so relevant and important, both for contemporary UK, and as you pointed out, even for developments in France and probably elsewhere in Western Europe as well. I mean, in many ways, the 1968 River of Blood speech by Enoch Powell can be viewed as a sort of founding event, even though it was not really founding, but one of the key early events of post-colonial, post-World War II, anti-immigration racism in contemporary Europe beyond Britain. So thanks a lot for that. So I'm going to try and keep it short and just see how I can add a few things from our intro, given that you've already said a lot. Now, I think to try and complement what Vincent said, I think this 1968 so-called quote-unquote River of Blood speech delivered, which is the object of the play, as you explained, which is essentially what the play is based on. To understand it, we've got to look at Powell, because an important subject matter in the play, I think, is Enoch Powell himself. And Vincent and I have been very interested when we were thinking about Chris's play and when we were writing the intro in the French edition by this book. I don't know if everybody can see it, if I'm showing it well on the screen, by Camilla Schofield, Enoch Powell and the Making of Post-Colonial Britain, which gives a lot of background information and makes a lot of important points. And there's a key element in that book, which is that in order to understand why it's so important to talk and write and think about Powell and about his River of Blood speech, you have to historicize, as she says. So I'm quoting from, she's a historian from Camilla Schofield, historicize both the man, Enoch Powell, and the speech, which Vincent and I tried to do at our own modest scale in our introduction, which we understood as trying to untangling all the linkages that through which Enoch Powell related to the imperial and military past of Britain, and also to the very, very contemporary realities of the United Kingdom of the late 60s. That was a very fast changing society in many ways, and in which Powell was, it seemed, was trying to find his place with a lot of difficulties. And I also want to quote from other colleagues, Olivier Estève and Stéphane Porion, who have recently or are in the process of publishing, I'm not sure, but who have a book coming out soon on this, and who I think very interestingly have entitled their book, I quote from memory, so I'm not sure, and I forgive them in advance if I'm misquoting them, but the title of their book is something like Enoch Powell, a political animal which doesn't die, which is another way of what Vincent was saying, in which I think Chris's play shows very well that he was the speech is very political in many ways, and it's had a lot of impact in many ways, and it seems to keep on reverberating, unfortunately, in contemporary society. So I'm not going to insist anymore on the history of migration, even in the UK post-World War II, even though it's fundamental, but I think Vincent has said all the key elements of our intro. So I'll just, I'm sure Chris can say a lot and others can say a lot, and we can devote more time in the questions sort of session part of today's seminar, if we need to. What I can add, perhaps, although that would be repeating what Vincent's been saying, but hostility to immigration, to post-colonial immigration post-World War II in Britain is not just post-colonial. That's important. That's an important point to make. It was also Irish and Polish in quite large numbers, but that wasn't what concerned Powell and other people opposed to immigration like him. What concerned him was the post-colonial immigration from the West Indies. That means Black people which in the French contemporary context would be described as visible minorities, and also people from the Indian subcontinent, India, Pakistan, and later Sri Lanka. So in the case of the constituency of the area of Birmingham, where part of the play takes place and where the speech was also delivered, there was a particular striking illustration before the Powell speech in '64, when a conservative candidate to election had an election slogan that said, if you want an N word for nigger, vote Liberal or Labour. I'm sorry, Vincent, if you already quoted this, but I think it's a very important element of context. Powell wasn't the only or the first to use this kind of overtly racist, argument to try and win votes on the basis of anti-post-colonial and racist, I would use the word racist without any hesitation, anti-immigration sentiment. Also, another important element of political context to understand the speech is that in the 60s, there were Labour governments from 64 to 70 who remained in history for presiding over what has been remembered in collective memory as Labour's or Britain's liberal hour, quote unquote, liberal hour, in which they legalized abortion, decriminalized homosexuality, facilitated divorce, tried to encourage through legislation wage equality between men and women. It's also culturally the decade of the miniskirts, of the rising fame, the explosion of the Beatles nationally, but also internationally. It's the period of swinging London, basically. And that's very important, I think, because it's also, in addition, in that context, it's also a period when the Labour government puts in place the very first laws against racial discrimination, the so-called First and Second Race Relations Acts of 65 and 68, which has been very criticized since then and have been viewed as quite sort of toothless acts, but which nonetheless paved the way for further anti-racist legislation and created a culture of policy against racism in Britain, which was far from consensual. And that's important. This legislation is important to mention because it's precisely in reaction to the second of these acts, of the Race Relations Act of 68, that Powell was reacting and was angrily reacting when he delivered his speech on the 20th of April, 1968, the one that the Chris's play is primarily based on. So that's interesting because that speech must primarily be understood as a reactionary speech, in the sense that it's a reaction against a fast changing, a fast liberalizing society in many ways, including with the introduction of legislation against racial discrimination. So there would be a lot more to say about this, but to try and keep it short, I would just add, and to try and not repeat what Vincent has said, that also, and something that Chris's play shows very well, I thought that I liked a lot in the play, was that Powell was deliberately trying to succeed in orchestrating a coup, not as in overthrowing the government, but as succeeding in making a splash politically through his speech. And he knew, because he felt that there was, and that was quite clever on his part, although ultimately it failed, but it was quite clever because it seemed, in retrospect, when you're an analyst looking at this, historian, political analyst, he felt that he understood that there was a lot of opposition to this progressivism of the Wilson government and of the liberal hour of Britain and the swinging London, and so everything I've talked about. He felt there was a lot of opposition in the Conservative Party, in the grassroots, that was very clear, and also among the traditional electorates, the traditional Labour voters, the traditional Labour electorates. And so his speech was aimed at a wide variety of populations, I think. And I think it's really struck, it's quite clear to everybody. And in all the readings I mentioned, Camilla Schofield, Olivier Steve, Stéphane Borion and others, and Chris, that he struck a chord within public opinion, and within a few days and weeks of his speech, he received a lot of marks of support in public opinion for his anti-post-colonial immigration speech. So that's something important to note, that from the start, it was an influential speech that said something, that revealed, that was both a revelator and a catalyst of reactionary, anti-immigration, anti-progressive elements of British society that felt, shaken and disturbed by the rapid transformation of Britain into a more egalitarian and more multiracial society. Also, as a good conservative, as a good British conservative, Enoch Powell viewed himself, so he was a leader, he was a leading light in the Conservative Party. He was an aspiring leader of the Conservative Party. He was one of the key players in the Conservative Party at the time, of the right of the party at least. And he saw himself essentially as just an element, a link in a longer chain of transmission towards the future of the values of past generations, which is why I think it's interesting that Chris Hannan might disagree or might have more things to say about this. But I thought it was interesting that at the beginning of the play, there's a quote by Edmund Burke from 1780 that says, "What shadows we are and what shadows we pursue." My take on this was that, I think it's interesting because it opens up to a lot of different perspectives. But one aspect of this, I think, the way I read it, was that Powell views himself as somebody who has inherited traditional British and more broadly Western values and wants to transmit them to future generations. And of course, there's just a slight problem for him that sexual equality, sexual liberation, anti-racism just don't fit, and mass immigration from former colonies just don't fit into this worldview very well. He seems, the speech is in many ways a reflection of a struggle, internal struggle with this, and also a deliberate exploitation of this struggle within the country. This is why I was talking about him trying to make a splash, trying to make an impact. So he thought he was the humble receptor, inheritor of a glorious national past, which he had to pass on. And that's important because that's really very much related not just to his political positioning, but also to his personal life, because we have to mention, at least briefly, even though, and it's mentioned very much in the play as well, that he had a love of Greek and Latin classics, that he made brilliant classics studies at Cambridge, and that he was a very young professor of Greek at the University of Brisbane in Australia before World War II. The second point is that war, and especially World War II, is a very important factor in shaping Enoch Powell's worldview, and that's also very important in the play. So just to clarify the play, although I think it's pretty explicit, so I'm not going to insist too much, but he experienced the battlefield as a brigadier during World War II. He saw a lot of his comrades die, and he was that was a very important experience until the end of his life. And also fundamentally, he knew the imperial stage of British history. Like all British people of his generation, really, he knew the British Empire in its golden age in the early to mid 20th century. And the independence and partition of the Raj into two states, India and Pakistan in 47, was definitely a blow for him. And the successive independence of successive African countries in the 50s and 60s were obviously a blow to him as well. So that also explains the mass migration from the Caribbean, Pakistan, India were difficult to handle for him because there were sort of an additional manifestation of this imperial decline. And it was even viewed as a reversal of situation. And this is why in the speech he says, I quote, I quote from a French translation, in 15 or 20 years, the black man, so Chris Hannan will correct me, or Jeanne will correct me, probably, but it's something like the black man will have the whip over the white man.
The whip hand.
The whip hand. Thank you, Vincent. So it's important to understand that the reason, I mean, I think it's irrational, excessive. That's my personal judgment, but there's a context behind this. It's not just racism, fear of immigration. It's also this historical evolution of decolonization combined with simultaneous mass immigration from the former colonies, which is viewed by Powell as a reversal of situation, hence that quote. Now, without taking too much time anymore, I think the term pickaninnies, which is used very much in the play, probably Jeanne might have finer ideas about how to translate this into French, but it's translated as négrillon, I think, in the play, which works very well, which is anyway in the British language and also obviously in the French language, plainly, I think, I would qualify as racist language. It's important because it's also a kind of, it's racist, but it's also slight, at least from today's perspective, it sounds quite archaic. Racist people now don't really use, although I'm not sure about this, but they have other derogatory terms when they want to be unpleasant to ethnic minorities or Black and Asian people or others. So it's interesting because it shows that Powell refers to colonial vocabulary to talk about something that's very contemporary. He has one foot in the world of, in the old world of the empire and of just plain classic imperialist racism, and one foot in the world of something which is still with us today, which is anti-immigration racism. He's living through a transition in the late 60s, and I think his speech, among many other things, is a reflection of that. And I think the play, just to try not to take much more time, the play is a great reflection of that. That as Powell, both as a revelator and a catalyst of this new kind of racism, which is both post-colonial and also anti-immigration. So it's anti-post-colonial immigration racism. Let me see, what key points can I still make without taking too much time? So as Vincent said, there are lots of parallels, unfortunately, with contemporary periods. There were a series of racial riots that revealed the extent of the disadvantage, racism, exclusion suffered by Blacks and Asians and other visible minorities in the UK all throughout the 1980s. Even in 1981, I remember that Enoch Powell supported Margaret Thatcher in her very, very conservative and intolerant interpretations of the Brixton riots of 1981, which are very well remembered because there was this common report about that riot. I was struck, just to keep it very short, I was struck by the publication of a book in 2019 by a certain Rahim Kassam, who wrote a book entitled Enoch Was Right. So when I saw that first, I thought this was a history book about the legacy and the reverberations of Enoch Powell, especially of his River of Blood speech in contemporary society. But then it turned out that no, not at all. Rahim Kassam is a conservative commentator, and he's an advisor of Nigel Farage, who, as is well known, was a great contributor to the victory of Brexit in the 2016 referendum, and also a great contributor, more indirectly, but also importantly, to the radicalization of the Conservative Party's discourse on immigration and on Europe and on asylum. And so Rahim Kassam is an advisor, or has worked as an advisor of Nigel Farage, and his 2018 book, Enoch Was Right, is a perfectly straightforward title, and the whole book argues, I don't know if anyone has seen it or if Chris has seen it, the book argues that Enoch was a visionary, and that Rivers of Blood, and the subtitle is Rivers of Blood 50 Years On, and that today Britain is on the verge of civil war because it's become a multiracial society. So if anything else, this goes to show, I think, the incredible level of relevance of Enoch Powell in contemporary British politics and society, how it contributed to the victory of Brexit, how the intellectual climate that he helped to shape and fashion from the late 60s onwards, how his speech was remembered, how the reverberations of his speech kept on being remembered in various areas and sectors of conservative public opinion and conservative politics until today. And I would have a lot more to say about the great characters in the play by Chris. I think the character of Rose Cruikshank, who's, as those who have read the play have seen, is a central character, or even perhaps, I don't know, the central character, who's a British woman of Caribbean origin, who goes to talk to Enoch Powell when Enoch Powell is very old, and it's an impossible dialogue, and she wants to talk to him because she's been traumatized all her life by his speech and by anti-Black racism, by anti-Caribbean racism. She says she's been one of those people who are called pickaninnies. She has great, I think the play is fascinating because it shows how deep and how intimate the reverberations of power-light racism penetrated into the psyche of British people, including those of immigrant origins who are stigmatized in the play. And so this character, Rose Cruikshank, who's Black, who's a British Black person, but who has, you know, done a brilliant academic career, who's an Oxford professor, but who also has a friend who's also of immigrant origin, but who happens to be white, not Black. And she has personal difficulties communicating with her friend Sophia, because Sophia struggles to understand the extent of the anti-Caribbean racism that Rose has suffered from. So I thought that was fascinating because it's better than any political or historical analysis, even though the books I've mentioned, like, again, this one by Camilla Schofield is great. But I think Chris Hannan's play, through these characters, shows us very well how the very deep impact of politicians and their words and their speeches in society. Even though there are also interesting characters who are from the Indian subcontinent in the play. So it's not just about, the play is not just about anti-Caribbean racism, it's also about post-colonial racism, including anti-Pakistani, anti-Indian racism. I'm going to stop there. Vincent and I wrote much longer, much more stuff, but I think that's more than enough. Thank you very much for your understanding, your patience, everybody, and thank you, Catherine.
Thank you very much to both of you. So, Jeanne, if you're okay to explain us what the stakes were when you started translating the play in French.
That's right. So thank you very much. I would like to thank you, thank the participants who are here, Romain, Garbaye, Vincent, Latour, Pascal Cudicio, Catherine Puzzo, and of course, Chris Hannan. Very pleased to hear you today, but also the absent. So Elisabeth Angel Perez, whom I translated the play with and who could not make it, unfortunately, today. So what I will say is on behalf of our work together. I did not translate the play alone. So I would like to thank her very much for this opportunity, and Nathalie River-de-Carle, who came to find us and asked us to work on this play with her to publish it in the context of the collection she's directing. So thank you very much to everyone involved. I will say a few words of introduction about political commitment on the British stage. For those of you who are not familiar with contemporary theatre, so particularly striking is the capacity of contemporary British drama to address immediate contemporary events. For instance, Simon Stephen's play published in 2005 entitled Pornography was a reflection of the London bombings and was published just a few months after. And when it was staged for the first time in France at Au Théâtre de la Colline in Paris, Laurent Gutmann, who staged it in 2010, he comments that what he was interested in and I quote, is what French theatre doesn't do much is the way British theatre brings in immediate history. In France, I feel like an orphan in this respect. Why have we in France installed such a distance between the stage and the representation of the world, as if theatre was bound in order to be theatrical to introduce this distance between the stage and the world? The question is to find the right distance. So this introductory example shows that dramatists in Britain seem to be more concerned than French authors with very recent political crisis, and endorsing the inscription into the contemporary as described by Agamben. And Agamben, I will quote in French, says that seul peut se dire contemporain celui qui ne se laisse pas aveugler par les lumières du siècle et parvient à saisir en elle la part de l'ombre. Contemporain est celui qui reçoit en plein visage le faisceau de ténèbres qui provient de son temps, which could translate as the contemporary is he who firmly holds his or her or their gaze on their own time so as to perceive not its lights, but rather its darkness or obscurity or shadows, if we want to echo the title of the play. As a consequence, it is the responsibility of the contemporary authors to critically delve into the least gratifying and most traumatic dimensions of their time for the benefit of their community. And to name just a few other examples of the British stage, we have Carol Churchill, for instance, who wrote about environmental crisis, Martin Crimp and Gregory Burke about the war in Iraq, Simon Stephens or David Gregg about terrorism, Ella Hickson and Lucy Kirkwood about hyper-capitalism, Mark Ravenhill and Alice Birch about sexual politics. And if we look at Scotland, for instance, we have a series of plays and major projects that have been organized around the referendum in 2014. So we can see how the immediate history becomes material for the stage. And this was only to name a few examples. These plays address urgent and immediate issues frontally through dramatized situation, and they read history through a superimposition of the intimate and the historical. And the political and collective anchors itself in the individual subject. It is literally embodied on stage. And this is, I think, exactly this type of interplay between individual stories and collective history that Chris Hannan's plays is showing, because we have two levels, the level of the personal stories and negotiations of identities in the context of friendship, of love, of heritage, families, academia, politics on a more individual level, and they all echo the wider collective concerns about the identity as a nation. And that, I think, that is very, very relevant. If we look at an article about published about the production of What Shadows at the Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh in 2017, after its first production in Birmingham, of course, in October 2016, the journalist David Kettle notes once again the peculiar capacity of the British stages, and here of the Scottish stage, to hold a mirror to society's shadows. And I quote, the journalist says, "You've got to hand it to David Gregg, the artistic director of Edinburgh's Lyceum Theatre. He has shown quite a knack for surfing the date gates. With his programming and, more importantly, tackling urgent political issues in a properly theatrical way. He did it with his own rewriting of Aeschylus the Suppliant Women and its parallel with today's refugee crisis, featuring a choir of local women. He did it with Rhinoceros for the Edinburgh International Festival, which is Zinni Harris' new UNESCO adaptation, which is a veiled critique of Trump and how easily people can be seduced by poisonous ideologies. And within the same season, after a few days after a leak of the government plans to discourage post-Brexit EU migration, What Shadows by Chris Hannan was produced. So it is a hard-hitting, deliberately provocative examination of identity, race, and migration, as the introductory speech underlined, and it is charting the lead up to Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. So if I focus now very quickly on the play itself, in the introduction to the play, the authors mentioned the fact that the play is built around, and I quote in French, une rhétorique de la confrontation, voire guerrière, page 15, which could be translated as the rhetoric of confrontation. And I think this is very important as it underpins the question of identity in the play. And language is indeed of great importance in the play, the idea of une rhétorique, because it reflects how identities are constructed and deconstructed. And one of the real challenges of the translation of the play was to translate the heteroglossia, which is the multiplicity of languages. The play indeed functions as a chamber of echoes, voicing out simultaneously standard English as used by the Powells and the Jones, for instance, but also versions of English that resonates with Caribbean Creole accents as spoken by Joyce Cruikshank, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, and vernacular ethnolects or Urdu as used by Sultan Mahmud, for instance. So that was a real challenge. And to conclude and sum it up and maybe open the conversation with the author, I would like to quote Mark Ravenhill, who said in an introduction of a book that is entitled Theatre and Globalization, he reflects upon the act of translating a play from one context to another. And he says, I quote, "I'm fascinated by the way a work mutates and is reborn through translation and reproduction. I think now when I make a piece of theatre, there's always the concrete, that is the beginning, how this particular actor in this particular audience can use this word and this gesture to better capture the sense of being alive in this moment, in this city, in this culture. But there is also the resonant. And this resonant is, for me, I wonder what this will mean in other countries and other cultures. And as has been said in the beginning of this talk, I think the play resonated during the Brexit period, of course, in Britain, but very much resonates today in the context of French elections, for instance. And I think to translate such a work was very challenging and very interesting and very relevant to the debates we have in politics, in ongoing politics, whether in Britain or in France. And so I'm very honored to have worked on this project and very honored and looking forward to listening to more ideas and analysis about the play, hearing Pascal and Chris whenever you're ready to. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeanne. So maybe we can now hear Pascal and Chris on the play itself and whatever you want us to say on it.
Well, thank you, Catherine, and thank you to all the organizers for inviting me to join this conversation with Chris. It's a great honor to discuss the play again. I can't remember exactly how I discovered the play, but when I saw it on stage in London after it premiered in Birmingham, then it went to the Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh. The play immediately spoke to me, and it's a fine piece of drama. It's a masterpiece of a play to me, and so it's great to be discussing the play again with you, Chris. So the play is about identity, and so can we start first with this question about identity? Can you tell us about your own identity, Chris?
Thank you, Pascal, and thanks everybody. Thanks to Catherine for chairing, and Natalie for publishing. Thanks very much to Vincent and Romain, and for that masterful introduction. And thanks to Jeanne and Elizabeth Angel Perez for their wonderful translation. I'm very grateful to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. I think it is useful to talk about my identity, obviously, so as people know where I'm coming from. And the first thing to say is that I'm Scottish, obviously, perhaps. But it needs to be said because this is a play about England. and about Englishness. And so that's important. My identity, just to be specific, is in Scotland. I was part of a minority, Catholic minority in a Protestant country. Especially I came from, we lived in Glasgow and small places around Glasgow, within about 20 miles of Glasgow. And where the minority, the Catholic minority was about 30%, and the Protestant majority was about 70% of the population. And we all came from Ireland. In fact, we all came from Donegal, practically, from one county in the Republic of Ireland, or Ireland as it was then. So a large part of that identity includes a tremendous amount of racism. It wasn't called racism then, it was called sectarianism. Essentially, I think it's important to think of it as racism in the same way as we should think, I believe, of racism in the Northern Ireland context. It's two races in conflict. In the west of Scotland, it was two races in conflict. That affected everything. When I went to Mass on a Sunday, I passed a factory called Albion Motor Works. It employed 300 people. None of them were Catholic. In the centre of town, in Glasgow, no Catholics were employed in the shops. In the shipyards, Catholics had certain jobs and Protestants had the better jobs. So in all respects, this was a racist country. We didn't call it that. And indeed, when the Race Relations Act was passed in 1968, nobody in Scotland ever thought, no Catholic ever thought, we should take these people to a tribunal or to a court. It never crossed anyone's mind. It was just accepted as a fact, and that was it. Now, I don't want to be all poor me about this, and that's not what I'm trying to establish. That, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, we were discriminated against racially, blah blah blah. That's not really what I'm trying to say. Among other things, we were proud. We were pleased to be ourselves. We were strong. We had strong communities, strong networks, strong supports. And I think it's important to. I think it's important in retrospect for me to look back and see, not only were they racist, we were racist too. We were racist too. I don't know how else to express it. We were racist too. That's important. It certainly was important. I'm not saying that Catholics in Scotland would not. I'm the only one that would say that, acknowledge that. And I'm not sure I would say that in public. I mean, to my fellow Catholics, I'm saying it to you here. We were racist. So I think that's my identity, and you can see how it could easily have informed this play. The other thing I would say about that is that, of course, that it took me a while, because we were brought up so Irish. I was brought up to sing the Irish national anthem. I never sang the British national anthem ever. I still have never, ever sung the British national anthem. I could not sing the British national anthem because of the Irish upbringing and the anti-imperialism in our upbringing. I have never and could not sing those words or that song. However, eventually you come to realise that in terms of Scotland, for instance, our two communities, the Catholics and Protestants, have to form a nation. And we have to speak to one another. overcome these divisions. And in Scotland, we have done that in a way that has not happened in Northern Ireland. You have to imagine that Scotland is really extremely like Northern Ireland, extremely like it. However, we have managed not to go down that path, and our politics is not governed by racial identity. Does that make sense? That the Catholics did not form their own party, their own political party, or form entirely separate organizations. So we have succeeded really in forming a nation in spite of those serious and deep divisions. Very difficult to describe how deep those divisions are to an outsider. When I was a boy, there was no Catholic member of Parliament in Scotland, none. And you would not put forward a Catholic as a candidate if you wanted to win. So there were very deep divisions, and so I think that's enough about my identity. I think hopefully that's clear.
I think, thank you, Chris. Going back to speaking of racism, as Romain has already mentioned the opening of the play with that conversation with two characters, Sophia and Rose. Both are successful academics, Oxford academics. The difference between them is Rose is from Caribbean stock. She teaches at Oxford. Sophia has left Oxford and she now lives in Scotland. So she has cut off the links with academia. And Rose goes to Scotland to see her on purpose because she wants to write a book with her. A manual, like an instruction manual about how can we talk to people we hate. And Sophia says, we are all racists. So can we match this to your own experience, or what is your take on this particular, on these particular words in the mouth of Sophia?
Yes, I think that is absolutely true, and that is the core of the play. Really, is the well, in many ways, it's the core of the play. Is that relationship between the two women, between sorry, hold on, hold on a second. Between Rose Cruikshank and Sophia Nichol, between the two academics. Is the core of the play. And the core of the play, it really is addressing that question of how to talk to people we hate. And just recently, Archbishop Tutu, of course, died, and that was one of the things he always said is, you know, it's easy to talk to people we like. Mm-hmm. The question is how to talk to people we hate. And this is for me now, the chief question in a multicultural society. How to talk to people we hate. And if we can't resolve that, find a method for doing that. I mean, the play is in lots of ways about finding a new rhetoric, a new way of doing that, almost a method for talking to each other, a method for going about our public discourse or discussions. It seems to me that is what the play is about. I mean, obviously, just to put it in context, the play was written. I mean, this is probably very obvious to everybody, especially from the introduction. The play was written in the run-up to the Brexit vote. When I began the play, there was not going to be a referendum when I began the play. I began the play really at a time when UKIP were polling quite high in the elections and wanted a referendum, but there was no question at the point I began that there would be a referendum. However, it was clear to me that the problem wasn't going to go away, the question of English identity, and it was equally clear to me that it is very, very difficult for the English, and especially for the English left, English liberals, to address the question of English identity. I find it hard to communicate how difficult the English left finds the question of identity. As soon as you raise the question, just to raise the question, they simply cannot go there. They just cannot go there. I mean, George Orwell wrote an essay about this a long time ago during the war. The English left and nationalism, they cannot tolerate it or comprehend it or discuss it. And they think nationalism is inherently right-wing. Now, in Scotland, we do not think nationalism is inherently right-wing. And in many countries around the world, nationalism is not, or national identity is not regarded as inherently right-wing. To me, that's an Achilles heel. I speak as somebody coming from the position of the left. There is a great weakness in the left that they cannot address the issue of national identity, that they have no vocabulary for it, no words for it. They cannot reach their fellow English people. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to have that conversation. And that leaves a big, wide open opportunity for the right. Just move in, scoop it all up. Easy. So the play is about that conversation of English identity and how to talk to people we hate. And that's why I began with a toxic. I mean, I'm sure there are same things in France. There are toxic moments we're frightened to talk about, moments we're afraid to go near, because even to talk about them, somehow you get poisoned just by touching it. Just by going there, you're poisoned. Or you become taboo, you become off limits. And that's what's the situation for Sophia Nicol at the beginning of the play. She has broached the subject of Enoch Powell. She has suggested he might have something to say, some portion of the truth, and that has triggered her exile to a remote part of Scotland. So I think when Rose turns up in that remote part of Scotland and looking for peace, to me, that's what the drama is about. It's about the drama of, can they establish, can they speak to one another, and can they help us, therefore, to learn a new language, a less polarized language. Yeah, a less polarized language, and a language that works. You know, as I say, I come from a position on the left, but the reason that the Brexit vote was lost was because the left did not have any way of addressing. The left saw those people who were in favour of Brexit as stupid. Illiterate was a word used. Illiterate. Fascist was a word used after the election, after Brexit. Andrew O'Hagan in The Guardian described the people who voted for Brexit as brown shirts, illiterate brown shirts. So the play is in part about the inability of the left to talk to its own voters. I don't mean that they should become racist at all. God forbid. I'm not saying that at all. But yeah, there is a need for them to be able to speak the same language. Sorry, Pascal. I went on.
No. What is striking is that the play. Well, as we said before, the play premiered in 2016. The play was written before. We are in 2022. It's striking how timely the play can be today, because, as you said, Brexit hadn't taken place. The referendum hadn't even taken place. So a question about the timeliness of the play. And I agree with Romain and Vincent. The political background of the play, we can draw a parallel with France, because the political background can be the same. So how timely, you have partly answered the question already. How timely is the play now?
Yeah, I feel that's it's hard. I don't know what moment you're in France, but I feel the moment we are in this country is a moment to discover how to live in a multicultural society, and that is, I don't mean just, I mean that for all of us. So that's the meaning of that speech. We are all racist. We are all prejudiced. We're all prejudiced, and people find that hard to accept. People on the left find that hard to accept. People in academia find that hard to accept. That we too are prejudiced, and I feel there is no way forward until we can accept that, because we know that it's true. I mean, everything tells us, everything we study tells us that we must be prejudiced. As human beings, we're anthropomorphic. As human beings, we're prejudiced in favor of human beings. As atheists, we're prejudiced in favor of atheists, and so on and so forth. So for me, the greatness of Rose Cruikshank is when she discovers that she too, the Black academic, when she discovers that she too can be prejudiced. That is what gives her this insight and the strength to be able to speak to Powell, and not just in a way of just confrontation. What would be the point of just confronting Powell with his imperialism? We need to get something out of this for now. We need to get some hope and some possibility of a way forward. Yeah, I mean, I think that in the play, it's the scene where she discovers that she has, that she can be prejudiced, and Sophia tries to kind of comfort her by saying, that, for instance, from Sophia's point of view, she talks about how she's got a speech where she discovers that that she's been cheated on by her husband, she makes this speech at the point where Rose discovers that, you know, she too can be prejudiced. And Sophia says, when I was at Oxford, I thought no one could touch me. The cleverest woman in England. You feel such a fool. Your husband's been fucking students behind your back, for example. Such a cliche. The pain. And then, of course, it's your job as an intellectual to know more than everyone else. It's your identity. So when you know less, when you're exposed, you stand there. The world goes on spinning. You know, and she goes, I knew less than everyone. There's those moments where you know less, where you can acknowledge that you know less. And it's on that, or where you can acknowledge your ignorance. Until we can do that, there is no point in having any dialogue. Dialogue is founded on, you know more than me.
Speaking of,
if you didn't know more than me,
sorry, Chris.
Why would I be talking to you? But you do know more than me. At the very least, you know more about me. You know more than me about you. Do you know? And it's on that basis, finally, that we try and work out a rhetoric of how can we possibly talk to one another, and it has to be on the basis that knowledge is dispersed. You know, knowledge is dispersed. We can no longer go, I'm right, you're wrong. Pointless. Knowledge is dispersed. What do you know that I don't know? Sorry, Pascal.
No, that's my fault. Speaking of exposing yourself or exposing oneself, precisely, well, we all know that drama works on catharsis. And it seems to me there are two sets of catharsis in the play. The catharsis of the characters themselves. Sophia, Rose. Well, Rose is going to Scotland to see Sophia. She wants to work with her, but in the end, she wants to have her moment with Enoch Powell, and then we as spectators, as members of the audience, have our own catharsis. So as a playwright, where do you think that the catharsis lies in all that? It's an academic question, sorry.
Yeah. That's a very difficult one, Pascal, very difficult indeed. Very difficult. I mean, I think I do feel that moment where Rose discovers that about herself is a major turning point, at least in the play. And I want it to be an emotional catharsis. Yeah, certainly for her. What's difficult about a catharsis in a play like this, Pascal, is that you cannot rely on the audience to be in the same place. For a catharsis to happen in the audience, we all have to feel that that Othello has been duped and betrayed. Then we can all go through. Then we can all go through his catharsis. We're all in the same place. We're screaming at him, "Don't do it! Don't do it! Don't do it!" And he does it anyway. And you know, and then he discovers the truth that he's an idiot. So we can go through the catharsis with him. In a play where people are not in the same, I could not expect the audience to be in the same place. You know, some people would not have been happy unless unless Rose Cruikshank had taken Enoch Powell and given him a violent kicking. Only that would have satisfied them. You know, other people the opposite, unless Enoch Powell had like totally humiliated this black academic, they would not have been happy. Do you see what I'm saying? See how difficult it is really to get the audience in the same place and therefore to have a catharsis. So instead of that, what I wanted to do was to watch. I'm sorry, my cat needs letting out. Sorry. Sorry about that. What I wanted to do was for the moment of conversation between Rose Cruikshank and Enoch Powell. I don't know if catharsis is the right word, but for them to somehow to see if they could just talk to one another, to see what was possible. That was the climax for me, was can they reach out towards one another and can they find anything? Yeah, and I suppose, can they find a method, or can we find a method for going forward in terms of talking to people we hate? Yeah.
Catherine, do I have time for a last question, perhaps? Or do I still have more time?
Yes, the only thing is that if I'm correct, Jeanne will have to go within a few minutes. So, but are you okay?
It's a very short question.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm happy to just listen and then be off. It's fascinating, everything you have to say, Chris. Thank you so much.
Do not limit yourself in terms of the questions and, I mean, what you can say. I think we were all enjoying it. So, so no problem at all, no restrictions.
Okay, well, I would have a question then if nobody else wants to.
Well, I think Pascal has one last question.
Well, it's, if you allow me a silly question, I've prepared this one. Can we see the play as moral or political rehabilitation of Enoch Powell?
Thanks, Pascal.
They call that comic relief.
No, that is a difficult one. I mean, the only thing I can say is that it was important not to demonize Enoch Powell, because otherwise it would the whole point of the play is can we talk to people we hate? So you know, my kind of image in my head was can Martin McGuinness talk to Ian Paisley? Yeah, so and of course they can't if they demonize each other. Eventually they have to get in the same room and they have to speak. And I, in some ways, I treated Enoch Powell with kid gloves, maybe, out of respect, not for Enoch Powell, but out of respect for the 30% of the population who would, roughly speaking, you know, support that kind of that his, roughly speaking, his kind of
worldview.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Okay.
I've got plenty more questions, but over to you, perhaps, Catherine.
Yeah, maybe we could. I already see a few hands raised, so I don't know who was first, Romain or Marie, who wanted to ask.
Well, my hand up was first, but Marie, go ahead. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Garbaye. Sorry, my camera is off, and I couldn't find the device that I usually use, so bear with me. Well, thank you so much for this very insightful presentation of the play. So very quickly, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm doing research on the resurgence of a pro-European feeling in the UK. And I have been studying anti-Brexit grassroots groups for the past 5 years. I'm thus, I'm particularly interested in, you know, Europeanism and what it means to feel European in a post-Brexit society. And after the 2019 general election, Grassroots for Europe organized a big meeting which gathered over 250 grassroots organizations to reflect on the Remain campaign and understand where they went wrong, basically. And one of the main points they highlighted was the absence of a pro-EU narrative. Indeed, you know, instead of focusing on having their own slogan, rhetoric, or narrative, they kept on refuting Brexiteers' arguments. So now, as Mr. Latour and Mr. Garbaye very rightly said, Enoch Powell's speech, Rivers of Blood, was when it all started. So my question is as follows, and it's not particularly directed to somebody. So if someone wants to answer it, I'll be very happy to hear the answer. So despite joining the EEC in 1973, Britons remained, if I may quote Golan and Turner, reluctant Europeans. So would you say it is all about words? Do you think restoring a strong pro-European rhetoric would have been powerful enough to stop or curb Euroscepticism in the UK? Or would you say that Euroscepticism is anchored in British, or may I say English, identity? Thank you.
Anyone who failed to answer the question?
I'm definitely not qualified to answer that. Sorry.
Euroscepticism anchored in British identity.
Well, I can maybe just contribute one word, very modestly. I think Euroscepticism, if you look at people like Enoch Powell, definitely looks like it's anchored in some version of British identity. But then the question is, there's a variety of British identities. So the question as to whether Brexit was inevitable or whether to me is extremely open and unanswerable, really. I mean, yeah, of course, it's Euroscepticism, but just in the same way that there's anti-European feeling in all of Western Europe, all of Western European countries that are anchored in some sort of understanding of national identity, including in France, including probably in other Western European countries that I'm not so familiar with. But then the question is, there's a plurality of you know, there's also pro-European sentiment in Britain that's also anchored in history. In many ways, you know, people often quote Churchill as being one of the first pro-Europeans, even though it was a very specific vision of Europe in the case of Churchill. But still, so I think it's a very open, it's a very interesting question. It's a very open debate to my mind, so I don't have much more to contribute.
I don't think, Marie was talking about words, a matter of words, and I think it's true that you never saw the sort of enthusiasm that you might have expected. I mean, Britain applied for, EEC membership several times, and when they were actually, when they became members in 1973, I think that Edward Heath was the Prime Minister at the time, and certainly a great European enthusiast, probably one of the few prime ministers Britain had that really was pro-European. He organized, I think, a festival which flopped completely in 1973. It was entitled Fanfare for Europe, because he was a musician, and it was a total disaster. You know, so it certainly was seen as a sort of pragmatic move for many people, and actually the vast majority of British people voted for a continued EC membership in 1973. I think it was well over 65%, something like that, so 67, I think. And but it was seen as a pragmatic move to make up for deindustrialization, for decolonization. But I don't think there was much of a real enthusiasm behind that. Just something that Britain had to do to try, you know, to get started again in a way. But words, I cannot remember, even when I lived in Britain, I cannot actually remember reading articles, including in supposedly pro-European newspapers, that were so enthusiastic about Europe. I don't know, it's just a question. I'm not really answering Actually, you question Marie, but this is my impression. But you're right that words definitely lacked. Positive words about Europe certainly lacked. Yes.
Thank you.
Romain, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, I did. Thanks, Catherine. I was very interested in everything Chris Hannan said about the play. It really helped me rethink the play and just guide my sort of made me sort of think about the way I read the play again and relive the experience of reading the play. It was very interesting. And Chris, you focused a lot on, you said the center of the play revolves around the relationship between Sophia and Rose. That was a key aspect. And you talked about the importance of trying to use language and try to talk to the people you hate. It's more important to try and use language and speech to sort of build a bridge. And so that's the example of the scene between Rose and Powell when she goes to meet him, and that's what makes her interesting. So I thought that was fascinating, and it made me think, yes, but the play is complex because, so that's my question, do you also think it's central in your play, the fact, because that's what I felt when I read the play, the fact that words, as Vincent was saying, words are very important. So pro-European words have been lacking in Britain, and so the power of words is important, whether they are present or missing. And in your play, the speech by Powell has a very powerful effect. It's performative speech because Rose is marked, is traumatized for life by the racism, by the term pickaninnies that's used. And that's, to me, when I read the play for the first time, I thought the play was a lot about that. It illustrated how words hurts people very deeply. So was that your objective? Does that fit what you were trying to do as a writer? Or?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and again, that's something, you know, I experienced growing up, was that kind of sort of abuse, verbal abuse, really. I remember going to a Scotland match, a football game, and Scotland were playing Peru, and people in the crowd just assumed that everyone there was, all their fellow Scotland fans were Protestant. And so people would shout out, this person right next to me shouted out, "Come on, Scotland, get into these black Catholic," swear word. Peru.
Yeah. And so that
standing there going, it's that kind of so absolutely. But I do feel that the moment we're in, it requires all the minorities it requires all of us to get beyond that moment of hate and to find a method of doing that. And you may be in a different moment in France, but it feels like it feels like we don't know how to do that. We just don't know how to do it. So that and it feels to me it's because we're not able to see that we're all that we're all prejudiced. We're all coming from so to give an example of that is left-wing people. Of course, they're in favor of minorities, they're in favor of Muslims and so on, but they don't want the Muslims to believe in God. Tricky, because they do. you know? Or Muslim feminists, of course, want to embrace the Muslim community because they're left wing, they want to embrace them. But they don't want to embrace you know, the aspects of Muslim religion that they feel are anti-women. So what is happening is that instead of communities reaching out to one another, everybody's getting deeper and deeper and deeper into their own little corner. That is the danger of the moment we're in. Yeah, and it's not that I'm not saying that that feminists need to start saying, start embracing anti. But it's about how we have that conversation, and it's not the way we're having it just now is not helping. Right. Yeah.
Thanks.
Pascal, you had a question.
Yes, please. Sorry for the crying sign that appeared on my window. My finger slipped. Sorry. When was it? Two or 3 weeks ago? Trevor Harris was your guest in Toulouse, and he spoke of decolonization, and basically he said that decolonization is that doesn't really make sense. Well, in the sense that the empire is not dead; it's not over. And when I heard him, I thought of the title of the play, What Shadows We Are, What Shadows We Pursue. And it's basically the same question as Romain about the legacy of the empire and the legacy of Enoch Powell's speech on the people who felt deeply hurt, even damaged by the speech. Can Chris say a few things about why he chose this particular title?
Yeah, it comes from, as I think has been said already, it comes from a speech by Edmund Burke when he'd lost an election. And Powell said it, he was all very conscious of history, Powell, you know, and of his place in history. And he said it after he lost the election in Northern Ireland. And so when he knew really that it was all over for him. So it's kind of about failure, what shadows we are, what shadows we pursue. It's also about that, and I feel this very strongly with Powell, that, and maybe with people who like and I too share this, somebody who's, I am someone for whom identity is too important. You know, I know a lot of Tamil people here in Coventry, and they're it seems to me that they are very clear about their identity, very secure in their identity. They're not in conflict about it. Whereas I think for me, somehow I've always been in conflict with my identity. It's always been too important. I think there are people like that. I think Enoch Powell was one of them. It's too important. It's always too important since he was a child. But he also knew that in one sense, it means a lot. Identity in one sense means everything. In another sense, it's absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing, you know? Yeah. Well, what does a flag mean, you know? He more or less says that, you know, he says that elsewhere, you know, about the symbols of authority, the symbols of monarchy, the flag, and the, you know, absolutely means absolutely, you know, it's just shadows.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that's it's a strange thing for a man, strange admission for a man whose whole life was pursuing, as has been said already, pursuing the imperial dream. He wanted to be the Viceroy of India. You know, he wanted to govern India in person. That's what upset him when India found a way of governing itself without him. You know, he was really upset, took it very deeply. He spent the whole night wandering the streets of London in trauma because he could no longer govern India personally. So it meant a lot to him in that sense. But I think also somewhere deep inside him, he knew it was absolutely meaningless. And somewhere deep inside him, I think there is a nihilist, a man who believes in nothing. That's what I think deep inside Enoch Powell.
Thank you. Thanks.
I've got just a question. I was wondering whether the young generation in Britain, I'm talking about people in their 20s, 30s, is the name of Enoch Powell a reference or not? Or is he somebody they've never heard about? Because obviously to us it rings a bell, but I'm not sure about the young generation.
Yeah, I don't think they have. I don't think they have. Whatever ethnicity or culture they come from, I don't think they have heard of them.
Okay.
So yeah, that was another thing we had to be aware of in the play, that some people might think of Enoch Powell as being a fictional character, and it's one reason why we felt it was important for the speech to be spoken, you know, because it's not only people haven't heard of him, but certainly nobody actually knows in Britain, or only a handful of people know what was actually said in that speech.
Yeah.
Or for instance, the context that Romain gave for the speech. Nobody understands anymore that it was to do with the Race Relations Act, or yeah. So
yeah, okay. And I also have a remark, because you've been talking about the need to have a conversation, and I don't know if you've heard about this national conversation which was held between it was 2016, immediately after the vote in the referendum, and that was up to September 2018. There was a national conversation on immigration, and there were panels of citizens all across the UK discussing on immigration and integration. I don't know if you've heard about it. Well, and to me, it's not a surprise. It involved hundreds of people all across the UK discussing of what kind of country they want after Brexit, what is the place of immigration in the public debate, and they've been discussing a lot of things. But as you said, quite rightly, the people who were selected for these discussions were people who had middle of the ground positions, you know, not really in favor of immigration, but not really against. So people at the extreme were deliberately left out. So this is what you were saying, that the people, the difficulty to talk to people with whom we are not sharing the same opinion. And this was organized by two think tanks who campaign for a tolerant society, for multicultural Britain, and yet they selected people only on the basis of what they called balancers, you know, people who have moderate views on immigration. So this is exactly what you are saying. And that's why probably the conversation was interesting, but it should continue somehow. I don't know. I'm very surprised by the fact that so many British people haven't heard about this conversation. So it's really a shame. And one last point, there is a very interesting book which was published, it's in French by a French historian, specialist of immigration, Gérard Noiriel. He wrote a book called Le Venin dans la Plume, which could be like poison in the pen, in the quill. I don't know how you would translate that, where he compares how Éric Zemmour has evolved and is being now a candidate for the next election to somebody who at the end of the 19th century had a similar trajectory, using words. And this is what you were telling us, the power of words to in one direction or the other, you see. And so the poison dans la plume, le venin dans la plume, that's the title. It's a very, very interesting book too, in that respect. Sorry for the long comment.
There was one other question by Pascal. You wanted to ask another question?
Yes, please, but I don't want to monopolize. What Chris said made me think of, well, we can say that identity is an unfinished business, or we can ask whose business is it to discuss identity. I know that your aim with the play is to trigger a national conversation about identity, and what you do, it seems to me that what you do in the play is to help people, at least those people who have attended the play so far, is you give words precisely, or at least behind the lines, between the lines, definitions of identity, race, immigration, communalism, because there's a lot of confusion in the, going back to what Catherine said, in the current debate in France, people are confused. Do they have the proper tools to, the linguistic tools to analyze what's going on? And people do not really identify properly what race or racism or sectarianism, communalism, togetherness, otherness, and so on, these concepts. And I think that the play is stimulating and enriching for that. What do you think, Chris?
Well, thank you, Pascal. I mean, that's it's lovely of you to say that, and I think that's right. All of what you said is right. I think we need to work harder at just what you said. You know, all of us of trying to develop a language that is rich enough, if you like, to deal with such a complicated situation that we're in, complicated moment that we're in. I don't know if we've ever had societies as multicultural as this. Perhaps we have in the past, but I don't think they've gone together with democracy. That's the challenge. I think that's the challenge, and that's why it's so critical to find a language.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think, Vincent, you've got a question, maybe? The microphone.
Pascal, you were not.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, fine. I thought you had something else to say. No, I don't have a question. It's just a remark. You were making a point about the fact that the left cannot address a national identity, which is obviously a great opportunity for the right. Well, we find actually illustrations of that in France, because the left cannot address national identity, but is deeply divided over the issue, and anything that smacks of national identity or Republican ideals in France, because the debate is very much structured, in terms of Republican ideals, then obviously the left is split completely. And I think it's no coincidence that we should have two extreme, far right, candidates in the presidential election. And if you totalize, actually, the polls, they're likely to get somewhere in the region of almost 1/3 of the electorate. And if you consider that the mainstream right has been sort of contaminated by that, by that kind of discourse or rhetoric, then it's much more. And at the moment, the left is totally unable to address the issue. So I totally take your point, and this shows, I think, the timeliness of your play, both regarding the UK and regarding France. And I think the publication in French is a very good thing for that.
Yes. Yes. So we now have to hope that it will be performed in France.
Yes, absolutely.
I was about to say that.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing the play on the French stage, but in French.
Any clues about that, Chris? Any contacts?
No, I'm afraid no. I haven't heard anything.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a huge step forward that it's got translation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If I may say at this stage, if I can show to the screen for everybody the book that's been published by Nathalie, the French, the bilingual edition that's just been published by Nathalie Rivière-de-Cal. If you haven't read it already, do read it. I mean, I think all of those of us who have read it would encourage you to do it.
Yes.
It's a short play. It's very accessible. It's very interesting. It's very enjoyable. It's very subtle. And as you've seen in the conversation, it opens up a lot of issues about language, speech, racism, prejudice, communication, dialogue, etc. So it's very good reading. So even if it's not staged anytime soon, I hope it will, but even if it's not staged in France, we have the book. That's great,
Yeah. And wonderful. I love the image in the cover.
Yes, the image is fantastic.
The image is great. Yes.
You can see it behind me in the form of a poster, actually. I had it actually printed for my office at the university. It's great.
Yeah.
Well, I hope the book will help stage directors think of putting the play on stage, on the French stage. Because it's worth it. And and back to the British stage, Chris. Do you know if the play is going back to the British stage?
No, there's no plans for that. No.
Not yet.
Yeah, well.
Okay. Any more question? Yes, there is Natasha.
Hello. Thank you for everything. I have read the play in the wonderful introduction as well, and I really liked it. And I was wondering if maybe you thought that the Commonwealth Games would maybe reintroduce the conversation around identity, because I've recently seen a performance just in front of the Library of Birmingham, and it was really centered around the theme of diversity and books and the history and stories of people building identity and identities plural. Do you think that the Commonwealth Games will also be a sort of new way to talk about identity here? Yeah,
great. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Do you think it will be a good way to maybe have the play performed again in Birmingham?
It's a good idea. Thank you. I'll push that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, it's maybe the time to announce the next session.
Yes, so let's do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So next week, actually, Charlotte Good is with us, and she'll be chairing a session involving Derba Ghosh, who teaches at Cornell University in America. I will give you the exact title of the presentation. Sorry, I didn't. I had a document a few minutes ago, but I cannot find it.
Well, like it's Monuments to Empire.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Charlotte.
Thanks. Go ahead, Charlotte.
Yeah.
Okay, Charlotte, do you want to read the
title? Well, I can do it anyway. It's Monuments to Empire from Waterloo Place to Trafalgar Square. Right, if you confirm, Charlotte. So by, as Vincent was saying, by Derba Ghosh from the Department of History at Cornell University in the US.
No, and that will be at 12 o'clock French time, from 12 to 2, well, it might be a bit shorter, from 12 to 2 French time next week. And we'll obviously, you know, as ever, the link will be available on the MiDiB blog, and as well as obviously as the recordings of the previous sessions, including this recording. And I'll be very happy actually to watch it myself, since I had to leave my office for 20 minutes due to very untimely fire drill at the university. So which means that I couldn't actually hear at all Jeanne Schaaf's presentation, and I missed the first 5 minutes of Chris's conversation with Pascal. So I'm really sorry. I'll be one of the first actually viewers probably for that particular session.
And just a last bit of information before we finish. So next, to clarify for everybody, I'm not sure we were very clear. Next week's session is by Derba Ghosh, and we've said the title. It's about Monuments to Empire. And it's organized and chaired by our colleague who's here, who's Charlotte Gould, who's a professor of British Studies at Nanterre University in Paris.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Romain. Thank you, Vincent, for organizing this and announcing next week's session.
Okay, there'll be more advertising about the usual, you know, channels.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks, Catherine, for hosting.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much to Chris Hannan for being with us in person.
Thank you.
It's very much appreciated.
Pascal as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Pascal.
My pleasure.
Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much too. Thank you very much for this.
Bye.